Early Learning with Families at Your Library 2.0 project and hosted by InfoPeople. InfoPeople is dedicated to bringing you the best in practical library training and improving information access for the public by improving the skills of library workers. Both the ELF 2.0 project and InfoPeople are supported in part by the Institute of Museum and Library Services under the provisions of the Library Services and Technology Act, administered in California by the state librarian. Today's webinar is entitled Basic Developmental Milestones of Early Childhood, presented by John Hornstein with an introduction by Karen Gonzalez. And with that, I am now happy to introduce Karen Gonzalez.
Hello, and welcome to all the participants on today's webinar. My name is Karen Gonzalez, and I'm the Education Manager with Set a Head Start here in Sacramento, California. I also come to you today as a board member of the California Head Start Association, also known as CHSA. We are very excited about the blossoming partnership between CHSA and the California State Library. And this also includes, which we're very excited about, early learning with families coming to present at our annual education conference in February of 2015. We really do feel like we truly share a vision for supporting child and family literacy. Um, a little bit about Head Start. We are a federally funded program. We are a comprehensive early learning program for children 0 to 5 and for pregnant women living at or below the poverty line. So in California, that's just around 120,000 children that are being served in Head Start programs. So one of our big goals is family engagement. Our program really strives to support parents in their rearing roles, as really looking to provide linkage to agencies and organizations in the community. And we know that the library plays that essential role in providing accessibility to high-quality early learning for children and families. So at CHSA, we are really encouraging Head Start programs to reach out to their local libraries. We know there are a lot of partnerships out there that are existing already, whether they come um, from field trips to the library, visiting librarians to the classroom. Um, we know that some of those partnerships do exist out there, but we want to really encourage our programs to reach out to this wonderful resource and really help families as they may be getting their child's and sometimes even their own first library card or their first library experience. So we would also like to really encourage you librarians out there that are listening to reach out to the local Head Start programs. On the Early Learning with Families website, there is a link to the California Head Start Association website. There is a feature there that allows you to go in, enter the zip code of where you're at, and it will pull up your local Head Start programs. And we really would like to see just both entities reaching out to each other to build stronger partnerships, and we know that the families would really benefit from this. We do know that when schools and families and community and library being a big piece of that work together, it really does support children's learning and growth and development. So it so ties in with really the stuff that John Hornstein seems to be talking about today. I am very honored to introduce Dr. John Hornstein. He has worked in the field of child development for over 35 years. As a research associate at the Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School in Boston, John serves as a faculty member of the Touchpoints project. In fact, he developed the initial training manual for the project and also continues to train community representatives both in Boston and around the United States. John has his doctorate from Harvard University in human development and psychology, and his research has focused on the emotional development of young children, and that also really includes children with special needs, which is near and dear to my heart as well. Um, his other scholarly interests include cross-cultural child rearing, fostering of teacher creativity. Love that. As I work with lots of teachers, just being able to foster their creativity to just bring to life everything that they're teaching in the classroom. And also looking at program evaluation, which we know is such an important part of monitoring for quality. Dr. Hornstein previously participated in the Early Learning with Families Professional Developmental series by presenting the webinar on Foundations of Early Childhood Development. It's all about relationships. So it's wonderful to welcome him back to present the basic developmental milestones of early childhood. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, John.
Well, thank you, Karen. Um, it's so nice to have you on this time. We, of course, at Touchpoints, we do a lot of work with Head Start. In fact, we have the
Absolutely.
contract for the National Center on Parent Family Community Engagement. Uh, so
Yeah.
I love that you're in partnership with libraries. So I want to talk some more about development today and about what we all can do to help parents be great parents. I'd also like to say hi to Maria from Barrow, Alaska, because I was just up there and I'm sure it's starting to get darker now. Um, in any case, let's start with the slides and I will move right ahead here. So the um, the ideas that I'm going to just revisit briefly some of the ideas that I introduced last time. I don't know how many of you were on last time, but I think it's useful to kind of go back for a little bit and just check out what we talked about. This picture, I think, sums up a lot. I was actually recently in Grenada doing home visiting in Grenada and talking about joining families there. And this is a family and a roving caregiver. And I purposely chose this photograph because they're reading a book together and you're all librarians. But what the main reason I chose the picture is that there's kind of there's a story here in the picture. There's the mother who's looking on with the caregiver. The caregiver is pointing at the book, and the boy is looking at the book, and they're all paying attention to the same thing. The mother's not alone. She has a caregiver there to support her, and the child is experiencing this kind of warm feeling of being held by a number of people. So I think that what is partly displayed here is that there's an interactional process going on that's actually very complex and certainly is based in a social process and a larger social system. Um, I say that development is complex, yet a lot of the things that we do to support parents aren't are pretty implicit and understandable and easy to do. So that's what I want to get to. So what does this family need? Um, I think in today's world, parents need somebody to talk to. They need and the child I could ask all of you that question and we could spend the next hour kind of going through what the answers are, but I'm going to answer it kind of quickly and uh, in a way that'll direct us towards the Touchpoints material. This child, in order to grow up healthy, needs obviously an adult to fall in love with him. But the adult who falls in love with him also needs support, also needs a framework through which she can raise this child in whatever culture she's raising the child. So she needs, in a sense, to feel good about being a parent. So I think the idea, one of the ideas I want to get across here is that this complex system reflects a world. It reflects a world in which there are a lot of influences on children and parents, and that in many ways over the first 5 years of life, through hundreds of thousands of interactions with others, children kind of develop into who they're going to be and actually reflect the messages they're getting from their culture, in particular through their parents. So, to return to this idea, a child's development occurs through a complex, dynamic self organizing process. Something is always going on. There's always this kind of chemistry of the child's nervous system maturing, pushing him or her to do things, to reach out, to use language, to move, and in the process, the brain changes. The brain is basically dependent on these experiences, and cultures and families organize experiences for babies' brains. In a sense, it's overall it's a simple model. There's the child, and then there's the environment. And the child brings certain characteristics, and the environment brings a kind of a match to the child's characteristics. I think what we emphasize with touch points in particular is that it's always relational. However, it's not always intentional on the part of those people who are relating to the child. What we'd like to do, at least with the professionals, is to make it more intentional. The particularly unique part of the touch points approach, and you'll remember this from last time if you were on, is that development itself is characterized by periodic and predictable disorganization. Sometimes things fall apart. Every once in a while, development, whether it's as a result of the central nervous system or the experience in the family or in the culture, things get disorganized. Things kind of have to readjust. And the system, the child's system and the system around the child has to reorganize. And that's really the point at which many of the parents that we interact with can be very accessible to support. Each child has a unique individual trajectory given all of these factors, and I think that's very important in our work. When we talk to parents, I think one thing that they would really like to feel is that whoever's talking to them about the child recognizes the uniqueness of that child, the very special characteristics that child brings. So when we see Dr. Brazelton, for example, interacting with a child in a family, we almost always see him trying to find something unique about the child that he can say to the parent. Part of what I'm saying here is that this process of development requires things to get disorganized. So when the system is designed for things to actually fall apart or go into mismatch sometimes, that's a good thing, so that the system can reorganize around the new information. The child actually learns how to talk, and that's disorganizing for the people around the child. Oh, all of a sudden the child is saying no, or the child is coming up with things that are surprising and maybe even alarming. However, in the process, we recognize that the child is a new person and has new skills. So the disorganization associated with that is an essential part of the process. So Touchpoints is about joining a system of care, and as I've said before, the norm here, both cross-culturally and historically, is that parents really use other people in order to be strong parents and to help the child grow in a healthy way. So, often we feel like, oh, we shouldn't be talking to the parent about the child because that's a private kind of thing. And maybe a few parents feel that way, and we have to be sensitive to that. But the fact is that the design of the human being is that parents have always needed somebody to talk to. Even when everybody in the culture parents the same way, the child that you get is going to be different, and you're going to have challenges. So what we're looking for is a shift from asking the child and family to join our systems to our joining their system through the use of particular strategies that I'm going to get to shortly. And I think this is all very natural. I think that families actually get a lot of mixed messages about how to be good parents, how to be good, strong families, and that there's something very natural to turn to somebody else and say, okay, am I doing this as I should? So what are touch points? Touch points are predictable periods of disorganization in a child's development that can disrupt family relations, but can also provide an opportunity for providers to connect with parents. Okay, so there's two ideas here. The touch points are predictable points when things are going to fall apart. The child starts crawling and the family has to reorganize. The child starts making pretend and people have to respond to the fantasies and the fears that come along with that. So there's that part. The disorganization will happen. But then the second part of this statement is that this is a time when the system is open for input, that we can use these opportunities to connect with parents. And there's very specific ways that we can do that. I have my screen set so that I can't see comments, so I'm going to kind of go back and see. Okay. So again, the regressions in a child's behavior can disorganize parents. And I think all of you who are parents or know parents know that this can happen. That if the child's sleep gets disrupted, then your life gets disrupted. If a child has a burst in development, then we as parents have to learn how to adjust to the new child. Okay, here is in the Touchpoints framework, these are the points, and I want to linger with this slide for a little bit because I think it gets to the point of how do we kind of join this system. The title of the talk today was Milestones of Development. Well, milestones are interesting. In that they show up on the pediatrician's wall and we look at them and say, oh, my child is achieving this at this age. But what we're more interested in here is the process of development. What happens so that the child can accelerate through this in a healthy way? So here are the points at which you can expect disorganization. And I'm going to just drop down on a few of these. The ideal baby is what the shorthand is for this pregnancy touch point. Well, I don't know if that certainly doesn't sum it up. Parents in the process of getting ready for a child actually go through a pretty significant process of change during the pregnancy. And this has been well researched, and I think it's fascinating work. What does a parent think about in preparing for the child? And there are different tasks at different points in pregnancy. And so one of the things that we know parents typically think about is what's it going to be like? What's my baby going to be like? And actually, I think for librarians, it's a very interesting thing because what we notice often with expectant parents is they do a lot of research. In fact, we do that. We give them books, and there are hundreds of books for parents who are expecting a baby. That's part of the process. However, human contact is as well. So let's think about, what do you say to a woman who's in the library or that you meet and knows that you're a librarian when she's pregnant? Or the father who is expecting a child. Can you ask, what do you think this is going to be like? What are you going to be like as a parent? Have you imagined this baby? Just opening up the system so that the parent can have a chance to talk about what she expects or he expects. Not necessarily going into a lot of advice or any of the things that we often try to do with parents to prepare them, but simply to join them in the thinking of, what's this baby going to be like? What might emerge is fears about the baby, or excitement or whatever, but we can hold the process of thinking about it. So let's move ahead. Let's skip the newborn. There's so much been written and said about the newborn and what might be said. And of course, very few times do babies actually get born in libraries, although that would be certainly a possibility. Maybe some of you are both librarians and midwives. In any case, let's look at 3 weeks. So 3 weeks. We know that at 3 weeks, things are going to be somewhat disorganized for this family. The hormones of the newborn period may be wearing off. The family that showed up might be disappearing. The baby is showing us all kinds of behaviors that we don't yet understand, and we're very tired. So what can we do to join that? We know, we can predict that could be a rough time. What works to settle your baby? Have you talked to anybody about this? What resources do you have? Not a lot needs to be said to open this up. Moving ahead, 4 months, looking outward. Okay, 4 months. What's happening at 4 months of age? Huge developmental burst at 4 months, or in that period around 4 months. The child is kind of turning outward a little bit. His or her eyes are getting, actually can see further. Visual acuity improves at this time. And simultaneously, interest in the outside world is accelerating. The child is no longer internal. How does the mother experience this? What's he interested in now? And perhaps a more provocative question for the parent of a 4-month-old is, how does she relate to other people? 4 months, my child's turning out. This intimacy has been something else. Maybe I'm relieved that my child is reaching out to other adults. Maybe I'm afraid of what that means in terms of my relationship with my child. Let's move ahead to 9 months. Okay, 9 months, another huge shift in who a person is. 9 months of age, babies start crawling. Babies start playing with objects in a more purposeful way. Babies seem to have more of a memory for people and objects. They start getting what we call in child development object permanence. So there are these huge changes that literally come with the child's mobility. The child is now moving. So how do I deal with that as a parent? And again, this disorganization is healthy and typical, yet it can be, kind of disorienting for parents. We want the disorganization. We require the disorganization. Interestingly, at 9 months, the baby starts crawling but does not yet have a fear of heights. At the same time as the baby starts crawling and does not have a fear of heights, the baby starts social referencing. The baby starts looking to adults for guidance, looking to the caregiver for guidance. So you can see the 9-month-old child starting to crawl, going towards something that perhaps is not so safe, something that kind of is a little confusing, and the child now will turn back and look at the parent, and the face that the parent makes, the gesture, the tone of voice that the parent gives now helps the child regulate what he or she's going to do. This is a profound shift in the relationship. Before, the child was sitting there, maybe making noises, asking for something, but now the child is almost like the child is reading the parent's mind. So this is a large change. There's a disorganization that parents experience around this touch point. And so how do we, as people joining the system, what do we say? And we don't have to say a lot in order to open up the possibility of a conversation that supports this parent's mastery. So how does having a baby who crawls change things for you? Is the child getting into things? Simple things that we can just open up the conversation. Let's jump ahead now to 15 months. One of my favorite ages, 15 months. 15 months. The child is just starting to reach out in a different way, starting to have a sense of self that actually becomes a little bit more provocative. Um, at 15 months, the child typically is walking, uh, has already mastered a lot of fine motor skills, has been doing a lot of exploring of the world, yet at the same time, maybe realizing that with all these new skills, I still need to make sure that somebody's there to take care of me. So, so a good question at this point is, what's he doing on his own now? And that question, what's he doing on his own? It's actually, it's got several layers to it. It's about his development. Let's talk about what he's doing. But it's also on his own. What does that mean for your relationship? And what does that mean for your skills in managing that relationship? We're not necessarily assessing in any way. We're just joining the conversation so that the parent can gain mastery over this. 18 months. You wonder, why does John go from 15 to 18 when he skipped all these other ones? It's because I love toddlers. I love what happens in this period. The child is becoming a person in a very, very cultural kind of way. The child is learning right and wrong. The child is learning a sense of self, and the child is beginning to use language in a much more purposeful and powerful way. At 18 months, we can expect the child to begin pretending to. And so a lovely question is, does he imitate you, or does she imitate you? Again, you see what I'm doing, and I'll get to the principles in a minute. But what I'm doing is I'm raising the fact that there are several things that we're touching when we talk to a parent about a child. We're talking about the behavior and what the behavior means. We're talking about the relationship of the parent and the child. And we're talking about the parent's capacity to manage being a parent, manage the child's development, manage the child's learning, manage her or his life in relation to work and parenting and family and everything else that may impinge on that. Okay, now I'm going to jump over 2 and 3 years and go to 4 years. 4 years of age. The child is much more powerful, much more articulate, yet with that power and capacity to articulate and to think and to use language, a lot of other stuff arises. So yes, it's exciting. 4-year-olds are interesting people. They have great play that we can look at and be amused by and be impressed by how much they know. At the same time, it brings out things like aggression, sexuality, issues that may be confusing to the parent, that may be, cause the parent to think, okay, what's next? And how do I prepare the child for the real world, since my child now is bringing up real world issues, like aggression. If the child is exposed to news at all, they're going to be exposed to aggression. And so just a conversation about the child's play, dramatic play, as I'll get to later, and I think I mentioned in the first session, is one of the great gifts that development gives children. The capacity to make pretend, to act out things that are a little disorganizing, the things that are a little confusing. And if you really observe the play of 4-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 17-year-olds, if you observe their play, you're going to see themes that reflect what's really troubling them. It's an amazing tool that the child uses to make sense out of things that don't really make sense at that point in the child's life. And of course, we as adults do the same thing. We go to movies and we read novels and we do many things of that sort. So we can go on with these, but what I'm trying to point out is that at each of these points in development, there are opportunities to touch into the system to allow the parent to kind of open up and reorganize in a way that they can be more competent, that they can support the child's development in a way that that is growth enhancing, that is accepting of some of the disorganization. Again, that basic point that we make with touch points, that there are points in development where things get disorganized, where they fall apart a little bit. My final example here is with the 5-year-old. Who I am matters. Who I am. I am a person. I am transitioning to the bigger world. I am going to be going to school now. My parents are nervous about that. Yet I'm a big boy now and I can do it. Or I'm a big girl now and I can do it. So a good question at this age might be, what does he do on his own? Now, I think with all of these examples, as I'm reflecting on it, with all of these examples I've given all along the way, they're pretty much defined by the cultural expectations of the parents. Karen, in her introduction of me, mentioned my work with special needs. And one of the things that I learned in my work with families of children with special needs is that the culture had a lot to do with the level of expectations for what the child could or could not do. Special education, for very good reasons, really emphasizes independence on the part of children. If you look at the goals of individual plans for children, whether it's IFSP, individual family service plans for under 3-year-olds, or IEPs for older children, the goals often are can do independently. Yet, culturally, that varies a great deal. In some societies, particularly when the child has a special need, the mother in particular feels that she should do for the child, that that's her role. So the culture of special education often comes into conflict with the culture of the family. And what we propose with touch points is not so much that one is right and one is wrong, because the child has to prepare for the real world that he's going to enter and the culture that he's going to be successful in. But that there needs to be some negotiation about that. There needs to be some buy-in from both sides. And of course, Karen also mentioned the center on parent, family, and community engagement. That's a lot of what we do. Is we engage parents where they are, not where we want them to be. So enough for this slide. Any questions? Okay. I think that the question I have on my screen here is when you're speaking with a parent about a child, how can you have it be non-judgmental? How can you bring up the child's behavior or the parent's sense of competence in a way that doesn't seem like it's judging the parent? And I think it's a wonderful question, because none of us want to be judged as parents. We want to be supported in our competence. And so actually, I'm going to get to that in part next, but it's a nice segue, because the way to do it is to observe the child together, is to simply see what the child is doing. So when we look at the child and we say, oh, it's interesting that he chose to go over to the bookshelf, when he came into the library, all you have to do is say that. You don't have to say, well, isn't it great that he went over to the bookshelf and not the climber? You could say, oh, he came in here and he immediately ran to the climber. You know, it's the description itself gets you into the conversation, and it does. It's not judgmental when you simply describe the behavior. Okay, so now I will move to the principles that I've been referring to throughout, but just surreptitiously. I've been referencing this language. Oh, let me answer this one question that I've got first. I have I have a little difficulty paying attention to three or four things at the same time. It's a male thing, I guess. Um, anyway, here's a very interesting question: how to get people who would not normally come to a story time? Um, I think, you know, the principles here might help, in particular using the behavior of the child as your language. What do children like to do? What are the children whose parents you want to come to story time do? And look at their behavior and try to arrange something that will elicit that behavior, that will bring them. Um, I think, you know, this is not my strength. This is not my area. I think you librarians probably could share among yourselves uh, ways in which you solicit um, people to story time. I suspect, and Karen will be familiar with this reference, Head Start in many areas of the country has had some difficulty getting parents to come to what they call socializations for early Head Start. And I did some interviews of parents at a couple of our sites, and I found that, well, first of all, the title socialization was getting in the way a little bit. But the other thing is that I found that the goals of the parents seemed to be a little bit um, uh, different than the goals of the program. And so I think that probably I would go to the parents and say, "What do you want out of this?" Um, I guess if story time is only for the children and not for the parents, or in support of the parent-child relationship, then I would go there a little bit as well. I would go toward, you know, this is for you and your child. I suspect you do that anyway, but can you get that message across more explicitly, that this is of benefit to the parent-child relationship as well as to the child's learning? Well, there's such an emphasis on school readiness and cognitive functioning in today's world. Not that I have anything against that. However, I think that what gets lost sometimes is that any success in that domain is based on quality relationships. So I'd be looking to do things to support the parent-child relationship. Another question is, how do you get a 9-month-old to sit in story time? Yeah, well, that's a good question. Well, my first answer is you don't. Um, they pretty much will squiggle around. I think, however, you can set the scene. It's a good question. Um, I think you can set the environment in a way that encourages, again, the relationship. Um, 9-month-olds do pretty well sitting with people, but each 9-month-old does it differently. Some 9-month-olds like to be held in the lap. Some 9-month-olds like to climb on you and look at your ear while they're doing other things. Every child has a different valence when it comes to those temperamental characteristics. So I would have a lot of variation in how they participate in a story time. The other possibility here is that 9-month-olds, more than probably any other age, love objects. They've fallen in love with objects. The Dan Stern talks about joint attention to objects as a privileged window into the relationship between a caregiver and a child. That when an adult and a 9-month-old are playing with an object together, there's something very special going on. So I would say that if there is a 9-month-old that is not sitting in story time, that I would probably try to, the 9-month-old may not be paying attention to the book, but may settle and focus better if the adult with the 9-month-old has some object that they can jointly attend to during the story time. It seems like multitasking for 9-month-olds, but to me, that's like one of the joys of playing with 9-month-olds is with an object. And there might be a favorite object already, although most children develop a preference for like a transitional object a little later than that. But the fundamental point here, I guess, is that 9-month-olds like to move. I am 63. I like to move. I don't sit in meetings very often. So I think what we have to do is to we share the books in a way that allows for a certain amount of ants on an anthill kind of process. I think that actually a lot of settings could benefit from that understanding. That was nice, Shatisha, that you actually thank people. So 3 principles here that I want to get back to. Use the behavior of the child as your language. That's the kind of the one that Dr. Brazelton, the founder of the Touchpoints program, always reminds us about. Whenever he meets a parent and a child, he begins the conversation by describing what he sees. And the example that I'll use, which really supports all 3 of these principles, or uses all 3 of these principles, is when a parent comes in and the child is clinging to the mother's shirt or coat, he'll describe that and say, "Oh, look how she's holding on to your coat." And you don't have to say a lot more, just that. So what does that say? It says, I'm noticing your child. And in noticing your child, I'm also noticing that your child needs you, that your child is in relationship with you. And implicitly, when I say that, I'm saying, gee, you must be a good parent because this child is using you for support. So that first one, using the behavior of the child as your language, is kind of the royal road to talking to parents about parenting. What we all want to do is look for opportunities to support parental mastery, and this is why we're doing this. This is why we're doing this webinar. It's like, okay, we need to know something about child development so that we can join this system, so that we can have healthy children. What we often tend to do is we tend to praise people and say, you're doing a great job. Well, sometimes we have to do that. But I think more instrumentally the way we do that is to talk to parents about parenting. Oh, your 9-month-old is crawling now. How can we be ready for that? And then finally, children grow up healthy and do well in the world when they have strong relationships with their caregivers. So we want to focus on that relationship. So let me take these a little further. Maybe I used this picture last time. Obviously, there is behavior here that we can use to enter the system. My goodness, your child is a wonderful painter. Or actually, that's a judgment, isn't it? Your child likes the color white, it seems. In any case, use the behavior of the child as your entry point. Focus on the parent-child relationship. This one I was third on the list. I don't know why I changed the order, but in any case, I think it is not that difficult to do. I may have used this example last time, but I think it serves to support this point very well. A teacher that I was talking to noticed a four-year-old tying her shoes, and she was talking to herself as she was tying her shoes. And instead of going into a child development speech on how valuable it is for four-year-olds to use private speech in order to learn the language and learn how to use the language to solve problems, the teacher had the wisdom to stop and say, okay, let's listen to what she's saying. Of course, the teacher knew what she was saying. And it turns out when the child was tying her shoes, when the four-year-old was tying her shoes, that she was actually using the words that the mother used when she was tying her shoes. So in the process, she's saying, oh, implicitly, the teacher is noticing that the child learned this from the parent and has internalized what the parent said and is now simultaneously focusing on the parent-child relationship and supporting parental mastery. Oh, okay. More questions? Well, if they come up, I will answer them or attempt to, or in true Touchpoints manner, turn it back to the group to answer. Support parental mastery. I've been talking about that. Now we have the same picture. I purposely used the same picture so that I'm reading some of your comments. I'll answer the second one. What do you do for parents who aren't mastering? Well, that is a great question, Patty. It's a question that often we deal with in Touchpoints training is, okay, so we have parents and they don't look terribly strong to us. And I think, Touchpoints views itself and is a strength-based approach. That doesn't mean that we think that everybody's great at what they're doing. It means that the starting place is where people are. So I think that the starting place is what the parent is currently doing, starting with the behavior of the child, noticing the behavior of the child with the parent, looking for opportunities to support the parent when they look like they're doing well. But I think, even more important than that is engaging with the parent about parenting, like authentically. I don't think you can affect somebody's capacity to do anything unless you somehow establish a relationship with them. Again, I'm trying to read and talk at the same time. So I think it's establishing the first task when somebody is having difficulty in whether it's parenting or anything else. The first task is establishing some kind of relationship through which you can work. And in the case of parents, the relationship is formed through paying attention to the child and what the child is doing. Often we try to get parents or anybody else. I taught graduate students for many years. You want to get them to do what they can't do. Unfortunately, they don't always agree with you on what they can't do. I think that's true for most of us. So what we have to do is get some kind of mutuality. What are we going to work on together, and how are we going to talk about it? So we need to form the relationship and then establish kind of communication about what's important. Going back to Touchpoints, what's important, what we assume is important, is that at these periods of disorganization and development, at these periods where the child's starting to crawl or talk or get into aggressive play, or kind of become overtly sexual in their play, those times are disorganizing. Those are times we know that we can make a connection with parents because they have concerns. So I know I'm talking around the point a little bit, but I think for me it's not that they're not mastering, it's that we haven't gotten an entry point yet to support them in gaining competence at what they need to do. This is a great question from Eleanor. How much does one need to know about child development to practice this idea or this set of ideas? It's a lovely question, and my answer is going to be somewhat, I hope, somewhat surprising, which is not much. I think that it's more that you need an attitude of curiosity about children's behavior and development, that you need to wonder with parents. It's certainly nice to know that at 9 months when a child starts crawling that things get disorganized, or the transition to kindergarten is disorganizing and there are certain things that you can predict might happen. Those are good things to know. It's good to know generally when children learn how to talk and walk and do things. But I've never supported the idea of trying to memorize the milestones of development. I think what we need is an appreciation for the complexity of the process and some skills in knowing how to join the process, particularly for people that aren't early childhood educators or pediatricians. I think the curiosity, the general appreciation of the complexity of the process, and the idea that the process takes place within relationships, that there are going to be predictable points. You certainly are welcome to buy the Touchpoints book and read it, and you'll learn an incredible amount about development. I used the book, Barry Brazelton's book, Touchpoints, Birth to Three, the essential reference. I used that with graduate students at the University of New Hampshire. They loved it as a text, but it was written for parents. It's easy reading, it's to the point, and it gives you a great appreciation of development. I don't think you need a lot more child development knowledge than that to engage parents in the conversation about development. There are a number of good books in child development that you can read, but the question really is that was asked is how much do you need to know? And my answer is not much. You need to be willing to engage, willing to use your own experience, maybe familiarize yourself with some of the developmental progression, particularly if you know you're going to have a set of 4-year-olds come into the library or a set of 2-year-olds. Then it would be good before they show up to just look at something about 2-year-olds. Alicia Lieberman's The Emotional Life of the 2-Year-Olds, one of the best books written about toddlers ever, probably the best book. And so I would, rather than trying to memorize a lot of child development, I would engage in the process of understanding it with parents and with your colleagues and have fun conversations about it, because it is fun. I met with Dr. Brazelton yesterday, and we talked about our many years of work together. And one of the conclusions we came to was it's got to be fun. It's fun talking about children. It's even fun looking at talking with parents about children that are having challenges, because the process of development, even when there's a challenge, is exciting. It's what it's part of what's brought us to be the human beings we are. So I think it's more the how than the what. Okay, I really beat that question to death, but that's okay, because it was a great question. So The next few slides that we have 6 minutes to cover go through the tasks of the different periods. So I will very quickly make a few points about these periods in the service of that last question. The first year of life, what do kids do? They start regulating their states. They figure out when it's time to be awake and when it's to be asleep, and that becomes a huge drama within families. Attachment. Who am I going to fall in love with? How many people? And are they going to fall in love with me? Of course they do. Yet they do in very different ways and with various numbers of people, certainly to a primary person almost always, but then attachments form with other people. Development of trust. The world is a safe place, and the person who keeps it safe is usually the person I fell in love with. But the entire social environment needs to support this development of trust. And the trust comes not only from a predictable, safe world for the child, but a predictable, safe world for the parent. And that could be a webinar in itself. Sense of self. Yes, by the end of the first year, the child actually can see him or herself doing something and feel good about it or not so good about it. And then this point that I brought up earlier around the 9-month-old is causality and object permanence. That this playing with objects, that the physical world is something that I can have an effect on that relates to the sense of self, but also that there's some things I'm learning about that things exist outside of, when I'm not looking at them, that when I do one thing, another thing happens. So that's infancy in a nutshell. And here's some nice quotes. Hopefully these will be posted later. Now I'm into toddlerhood. Sense of self, autonomy. I love this idea in toddlerhood that we start making pretend. We start thinking about the world in our heads. As a result of thinking about the world in our heads, not just acting on it physically, we become cultural human beings. We internalize the rights and wrongs, the social rules. We internalize the sense of relationships with others, and we start telling stories with that. And this is such a lovely time to introduce kids to libraries, to story time. Of course, 9-month-olds also are introduced to story time, but in toddlerhood, this idea that, next slide, language is helping define who I am. As it's helping define who I am, it defines my relationship to the world. I now am a boy, I'm a girl, I'm this, I'm that, I'm big, I'm small. I start thinking with words, and as a result, I enter this culture. And it's very challenging for parents because when the child is starting to use words, they have to listen to those words. And that's hard because they didn't have to listen to those words. They had more power before. And then on the other side of the coin, the child has to be controlled by those words, and that's not fun. So they may have a temper tantrum when those words disagree with what they have imagined inside their heads. And this is a quote that you can read at your leisure. Because I do believe these slides will be posted later. And then finally, I'm going to end with preschool, this wonderful age when children are becoming children. They're no longer toddlers. They recognize a full set of emotion in themselves and others, and they can regulate those, or we hope they can. They can express and communicate feelings. They organize behavior to achieve a goal. This is so huge. We talk about school readiness, and there's nothing that predicts school readiness more than the capacity to organize yourself to achieve a goal. It's called executive functioning. It's very important. And we do it when we do story time. We do it with all the expectations that go with going to the library and the conversations that take place in libraries. Organizing behavior, finding a book, getting to the library, sitting in a story time. All these kind of skills that are related to organizing behavior predict to school success. Then, of course, what we're most interested in is competence with symbol systems. Play is a great route to that. Engaging in dramatic play, telling stories, me pretending that I have something to share with you, um, is a great way for me to cope with my anxiety. Um, Dramatic play is a way, when you think about it, the child is using imagination to address challenges, to address things that are challenging to the child in the child's life. I pretend, 3-year-olds pretend going to sleep. Well, it seems boring, but going to sleep is a very challenging time when you have ideas that scare you. So it's no accident that 3-year-olds pretend going to sleep. It's no accident that 4-year-olds engage in aggressive play when they are all of a sudden feeling much stronger and more powerful than they did before. And they have the words and the ideas to prove it. Dramatic play is a safe way to deal with those aggressive feelings. It's a safe way to understand the challenges that they're dealing with, to make sense out of them. In fact, to integrate the thinking part of the brain with the emotional part of the brain. There's this idea that when kids engage in this kind of storytelling and act it out, which is a wonderful thing that kids can do in libraries, and a wonderful thing that libraries, in fact, can spark through storytelling, is this capacity to integrate, the ideas that children have with their emotions. And one of the wonderful things about 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, preschoolers, uh, 7-year-olds even, is that they use this in such a profound way to make sense out of things. And of course, that's so connected to what libraries are all about. That we use ideas to solve problems, and there's a resource for those ideas. So I would see all of you as a source for the material for all the dramas that these children are going to be internally acting out. And ultimately, those are the dramas like solving problems of the environment, solving the problems of the social world. But it all starts with this progression in preschool of self-organizing, of being in a social environment where the challenges, the difficulties are not just assumed to take place in development and will be resolved, but are joined by the important people in children's and parents' lives. Should we end here? Or are there more
Probably.
questions? Yeah, I did run over a couple of minutes, but I had permission. And you were going to show these slides will be available for the participants. I apologize for not covering every one of them. But you also had a link, I believe, to a video on face-to-face interaction that hopefully will be available to everyone.
Yes, everybody, that's on the handout that is on the archived webinar page.
Okay, great. Thank you, Maria, for being here.
Thanks everybody for being here, and thanks for such.
Well, I've been communicating privately with my friend up in Barrow, Alaska, because I was just there, and that's like several thousand miles away. It's so great, and she's not the farthest. Somebody from New Zealand was on, I believe. So this is just so much fun. I wish I could just see all your faces and shake all your hands and meet all